I always felt like I wanted to be a girl.
I said, so I can be a real boy. And she said, huh.
Hi, I'm Tari Owi.
And I'm Fred Charles. Welcome to InBox.
In today's episode of InBox, we will take you through the lives of two remarkable people.
Yes, two different people born of two different genders who have switched to the opposite gender. We're talking male to female.
And female to male transition. What pushed them to transit? What was the physical process?
And what was the final outcome? Can it really make them happier? Their stories will both shock you and warm your heart.
My name is Cassandra Cass. I grew up in Des Moines, Iowa, the Bible Belt of the United States.
Professionally, I'm known as Marcus de Maria Arana, but the name I was born into was Mary Lynn Weatherly.
Marcus has experience working in education and human rights, whereas Cassandra is a performer. Their lives share a destination, but they began on very different paths. And one of them almost ended in tragedy.
I was a little boy who loved to play with Barbies and loved to cook and loved to just be really sweet and loved to sing, and that did not work.
My mother's mother was deeply troubled by my ongoing tomboyishness and masculinity, and so there was almost this forced regime of feminization. You've got to make her wear dresses. She's going to turn out funny. You got to make her play with dolls and makeup and all that little pink girl stuff, or she's going to turn out wrong.
My mother was very supportive. She let me be me. You know, like if we went to the toy store and I wanted a doll, she would buy it for me. And my dad would be like, you're gonna make that kid a fag, which, you know, was ridiculous. You can't make anybody anything other than what they are. Toys.
Every Christmas I would get a doll, and every Christmas, the day after Christmas, that doll would go up into the closet and sit on a shelf. Until I was 10 years old. And my parents gave me a talking doll. And I was mildly interested in this talking doll, so I had the head pulled off and I had the leg pulled off, and I was using the leg to try and dig inside to find the voice box. And my father proceeded to tell the Twilight Zone story where the talking doll comes alive and kills the family. So this time, the doll went up into the closet, but I had nightmares about the doll.
Growing up in Iowa was incredibly difficult. On one hand, especially when I was younger, it wasn't so bad, but once I hit the age where, you know, you're expected to be a boy or expected to be a girl, it was really, really tough. Elementary school for me was honestly wonderful. I think when you're before puberty and you're like little kids, I think people are more pure. Like, if they like you because you're funny or because you're interesting. And I was a kid who always, you know, had a smile on my face, who loved to play games and had a personality. So I was actually really popular in elementary school. But then once I moved into middle school, that was the first time I ever heard the word fag. And I didn't even know what it was. I remember being in 6th grade and someone was like, "You're a fag."
It was a lonely childhood. I'd say that I spent a lot of time doing solitary things like flying kites and riding my bike and playing with the dog, drawing pictures, because the little boys didn't want to play with me because they thought I was a little girl and I had cooties. And I didn't want to play with the little girls because they were playing little girl things that didn't interest me.
Let me just show you my day in high school. I would walk in, we'd go to homeroom. I would sit down and people would be throwing spit wads at me or saying, oh, look, it's the Forster fag. Or, I mean, I didn't talk to these people. They were just screaming at me and the teacher would be ignoring it. Then I would go to my next class, which would be English, and the same shit would happen. So, of course, I couldn't learn because I was so scared for my safety. And I couldn't turn to the teachers because they were witnessing it and not doing anything.
I was invisible, and I was miserable in my own skin because I couldn't be who I was. If you think about it, gender is the most deeply entrenched social construct we have. And it's the first question that's asked when a baby is born. Not, is the mother healthy, is my child okay, but what is it? And we are an it until the doctor tells our parents who we're supposed to be.
If a girl cuts her hair and wears boy clothes, it's not that big of a deal, but if a guy does it, it's degrading. And so for me, they construed what I basically was just being me as being gay, because they, you know, they were ignorant. So if I wore bright color, or if I talked with an effeminate tone in my voice, I was, by the Midwestern standards, a fag. You know, there was no nice, sweet words. I mean, they were awful to me, like awful. I remember being spit on, kicked on. I dropped out of school actually in the beginning part of the 10th grade because I said, I'm not going back. I can't deal with it. After 9th grade was over during the summer, I tried to take an overdose of pills. I didn't want to die. I wanted to be heard. I wanted people to hear that I was in pain and that nobody was helping me. Mind you, this was probably now like 15 years ago, almost close to 20, but I still believe that there are kids dealing with this crap today.
Coming up, you're not going to want to miss this. We have both the surgical and psychological aspects of transitioning.
So you gotta understand the transition from LGBT.
Having always known that I was male, I struggled with it for a lifetime.
I always felt like I wanted to be a girl. I remember being a little kid and I kind of thought I was a girl.
How would you feel if you were in their shoes? The feeling of being born with the wrong body can be hysteric. That feeling is known as gender identity disorder, and it is a medical condition that can be treated. Cassandra and Marcus took numerous steps to make their physical bodies match their internal experiences.
It first started in my teenage years with taking hormones. I would get little things done here and there. My first thing that I got was I got a nose job. And I got breast enhancement, and I pretty much, was living as a girl in my mind. Then years and years later, I got a sex change. And I don't even feel I'm done yet. There are certain other things I'd like to do. So, I mean, I wish I would have just been born a girl. It would have been so much easier.
Hold on. Transitioning to the opposite gender does not happen in the blink of an eye. There's usually a procedure to follow.
Is there a psychological diagnosis that goes with being transsexual? Absolutely. It's gender identity disorder. And for many doctors, you must have that diagnosis before they would even dream of giving you hormones, much less performing any kind of surgery.
I had to go to psychological testing because in order to get a sexual reassignment surgery, you have to go to therapists to make sure that you are competent, which is a little frustrating because in one corner of your mind, you're like, I gotta go pay someone to tell me that I can do what I want with my body.
There is still a standards of care procedure where One letter is required for hormones, another letter is required for top surgery, and 2 letters are required for genital surgeries.
But I did that, and of course I free and clear got by it and got my letter, and then I proceeded to go to Scottsdale, Arizona and have the surgery, which was like $30,000. So it was really expensive and very tedious in the recovery and the maintenance, you know, to get it where you can go trick the boys.
Hormonal transition takes anywhere from 4 to 7 years. Surgical transition, depending on the number of procedures, can be facilitated in one single surgery to up to a year and a half of different procedures. The person can spend anywhere from $5,000 to $150,000, $200,000 having surgical and hormonal reconstruction. The standards that I was able to follow here in San Francisco were very humane. I met with a social worker who talked to me for an hour and came to understand that I had felt this way for a lifetime, and that the best way to treat this is not to try and put me through psychological testing or any kind of behavior alteration, but rather to allow me to transition into the gender that I should have been born into.
There are lots of online resources, social groups, and communities that clients participate in as they are uncovering their process in their gender reassignment.
So it was in that context that I was able to meet other transgender men like myself, to find support groups, to learn what processes there are so I could decide what kind of transition is best for me.
Transitioning is not quick, but after it's done, the result most times is worth the lengthy process.
Most female-to-male patients choose for their transition surgery to have mastectomies, which is the removal of the breast tissue, and then chest reconstruction, so plastic surgery to have a male-appearing chest.
The happiest moment was when I woke up after chest surgery and put my hands to my chest and felt a man's chest and said, okay, now I'm good.
What kind of procedure is best for a target sex?
Well, it also depends on whether you're going from male to female or female to male, because there's many different procedures involved. And obviously, if you're going from female to male, there are extra procedures such as mastectomy.
They also may choose to have hysterectomy, which is removal of the uterus with the cervix, and often the fallopian tubes and ovaries. That can be done now as an outpatient procedure through the belly button using a thin little scope. They usually go home same day and at most would stay overnight. For those having the lower surgery or bottom surgery, which involves the external genitalia, that would be the metoidioplasty, which is cutting the skin around the clitoris so that the clitoris becomes more apparent and the ligaments that support it. And also then to do scrotoplasty, which is implantation of testicles into the labial tissue, which then becomes scrotum.
What about the reverse? I mean, male to female? Cassandra had a vaginoplasty surgery, and the process did not end in the operating room.
There's 2 surgeries that I had to have. The first is to create the, I guess you could say, vagina. The second surgery, which comes 3 months later, is where they create the cosmetic. They make it look pretty. Right after you get the sex change surgery, you have to do a thing which is called dilating. Because keep in mind, it is, I hate to say an open wound, but it is. So if you don't dilate, it could close up, like completely close up, and you could literally not have anything.
No pain, no gain. But no matter how great that gain, transitioning to the opposite sex has a downside.
The only difference I would say that I know of would obviously be that I don't have periods and I can't, have children.
There's absolutely something that you should know of, that being transgender is beyond undergoing a surgery.
Gender is far more about what hormones and surgeries one would select rather than how one lives one's life. And having lived as a masculine person exclusively since 1994, I would say absolutely I walk through the world as a man.
Sex change just seems like, oh, one day I'm a boy and one day I'm a girl. I believe sex and how you feel about yourself is so much deeper than your genitals.
Really, it's about the appearance and less about the transition from genders.
Did they live happily thereafter? Coming up, you get to know about their lives after transitioning.
Transitioning is a lengthy process that varies from person to person. The transition in one's daily life is called re-socialization, and that may or may not be difficult depending on whom you ask. But for Cassandra, she lights up the stage.
This was never the way I planned, not my intention.
If you've ever been to a good show, people enjoy it. You know, I saw people in the crowd clapping and having fun, and to me that was the closest thing at the time that I was going to get to being a star.
Cassandra is unique because she has a lifestyle she loves.
As hard as my life has been at times, and still continues to be at times, I pick myself up.
Normally, people who transition face an uphill battle to feel accepted in the workplace.
First of all, San Francisco is very aware of transsexuals, so they're really good at like knowing who is what and what is what. I generally feel safe when I travel, but I am always aware that something could, all it takes is one person who's bigoted or hateful and it can turn into a bad situation.
What happens in San Francisco are a couple of things, and one is that transgender people migrate here because there's favorable policies and laws in place that will protect transgender people from employment, housing, and public accommodations discrimination.
Making a change physically is one thing, but what about the simple things, like a driver's license or a social security card? In some countries outside the US, getting a new ID card for your gender is not allowed, but in the United States, it can be done.
That arguably sometimes the paperwork is harder to deal with than the actual process itself. There are plenty of doctors available who will prescribe hormones. There are doctors available who have the technology to do the kinds of surgical reconstructions that different people engage in. For me, it was doing things like changing my social security and most recently getting a passport. So in order for me to get a passport to go to Canada, I had to take my old social security card and my old college ID that showed that that was my social security number and my birth certificate that has Mary Lynn Weatherly on it, and I had to draw the paper trail between that person and this person. So essentially, tell the story of my life and transition to an absolute stranger who would decide whether or not I was man enough to get that M on my passport. But I'm really happy to say that I got the passport, 10-year passport with an M, so I'm good.
But how about their family?
I just wanted a regular guy who liked regular sex. And so now, having a sex change, I feel like it's a lot easier if I meet a guy who's, you know, like he just hits on me thinking maybe I'm a girl. And I'm, you know, it's a lot easier to say, well, I've had a sex change versus, hey, I've got what you have, if that makes sense. Like, a lot of them will still want to have sex with me, straight men, but it's a whole nother thing of, do they want to date me? Do they want to introduce me to their friends? Do they want to take me home to mommy and daddy? That's a really hard one, you know, so that is still a huge issue and probably always will be in my life, to find a guy who is comfortable enough and strong enough with himself to deal with the pressure he's going to get from other people by being with me.
Some people lose their families, some people lose their parents, not everybody does. And some of us find other family when we've lost family of origin.
I'm just human. I'm really a lot like you, just like you in more ways than you could imagine.
If we were to look at a system of non-judgment and integration, I think we'd all be a lot less hung up on is it a boy or is it a girl? Because the truth of the matter is I think all of us are a little bit of all of that. And this idea that something is strictly female and strictly male is an idea that we made up, because it only happens with sperm or egg, and everything else is a social construct.
Treat people the way you want to be treated. That whole line has been said over and over and over, but I really wish people would actually do it.
So how many of us thought it was just a surgical procedure? It turns out that the transgender journey can be a social and bureaucratic nightmare too.
Yes, I can't think of anyone more brave than those who have been through this, or more inspirational. Thank you for joining us.